Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Over the last 10 days, unprecedented developments have taken place in the West Asia region. As you all know, Israel has been conducting major strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. Iran has mounted a major retaliation against Israel. And just today morning, we have received disturbing reports of United States entering this conflict and carrying out strikes against the nuclear facilities of Iran. Now, these developments threaten regional stability and as well as global stability. They have serious implications for India's interests as well. So, in today's session, let's explore this topic in complete detail, including the background of Iran's nuclear weapons program and Iran's continued hostility with US and Israel. And we will also understand the larger implications of these tensions, and especially from India's perspective, what would this mean for India's economic, geopolitical, and strategic interests? So, welcome to the Daily Hindu News Analysis. So, before we get started with today's discussion, please ensure you scan the QR code and join my Telegram channel because after the session ends, I'll be sharing the PDF over here. So, let's start the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss today. So, there are seven important articles which are very crucial for both prelims and mains exam. Majority of them are related to the recent Israel-Iran tensions, and it covers the entire spectrum of all the topics that are related to it. So that is something we'll be discussing in detail today, followed by a couple of articles on Forest Rights Act and the FATF. We also have a couple of prelims related articles which we will cover at the end. So if you guys are liking the initiative, do support us with your likes, your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now let's get started with the discussion. Over the last 10 days, Israel has carried out unprovoked targeted attacks against Iran's nuclear facilities. The article in the newspaper reports that even yesterday, Israel has carried out precision strikes aimed at nuclear facilities of Iran. And today we have received reports that United States has entered the conflict as well. US strategic bombers have dropped bunker buster bombs on key enrichment facilities in Iran, including the Fordo nuclear plant. And this marks a very serious and significant escalation of the ongoing conflict and tensions in West Asia. This could easily spill out of control, and it would not only consume the region, it could completely destabilize the world as well, with very serious implications for Indian interests. So, to understand this in detail, we have to start with the background. To understand Iran's nuclear weapons program, we have to start with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT, was brought out in 1967 in order to prevent the further spread of nuclear weapons and nuclear technology. The then nuclear weapon states, that is essentially the P5 countries, the five permanent members of UN Security Council. By 1967, they already possessed nuclear weapons, they had tested them as well, they had inducted the nuclear weapons into their arsenal, be it United States, the Soviet Union, UK, France, and of course China. All the P5 members had by then become nuclear weapon states. So, to further prevent the proliferation and spread of nuclear weapons technology, the P5 countries pushed for the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The primary aim was to contain countries like India and others, which were also seeking to pursue nuclear weapons. For India, it was a strategic necessity to deter China, given that China had developed and tested nuclear weapons in 1960s, and especially given the border dispute and the 1962 war, it was a strategic necessity for India to pursue the development of nuclear weapons. So the NPT regime was designed to prevent the further spread of nuclear weapons technology and keep it restricted, keep it limited only to the P5 countries of UNSC. By 1968, NPT was opened for signature, and by 1970, it came into full force. Today, almost 191 countries have signed and ratified the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But India, along with few others, have rejected the NPT right from the start, as India believes that NPT and its provisions are inherently discriminatory in nature. Because if you look at the provisions of NPT, it only recognizes the P5 as the official nuclear weapon states. Essentially, all the other countries, they have to commit that they will never pursue nuclear weapons. Signing the treaty would mean that you have to give up your right to develop nuclear weapons forever. And if at all you have an ongoing program, you have to shut down the program as well. Several countries agreed to it, especially those who were looking for a nuclear free world, those who were proponents of nuclear disarmament. Several nations backed the P5, and many of them committed never to develop nuclear weapons. And if at all they had a program, they even agreed to shut it down. In exchange, the nuclear weapon states will provide civilian nuclear technology to the non nuclear weapon states. So the idea was to promote only the peaceful usage of nuclear technology for civilian applications like power generation, for medical purposes, etc. So NPT essentially would prevent any other country from ever developing nuclear weapons, whereas the P5 countries, the official nuclear weapon states, could retain them, even further test and expand their program, modernize their nuclear arsenal, while the rest of the world would essentially be prohibited from developing nuclear weapons. And in exchange, these nuclear weapon states would only share civilian nuclear technology. So I think now you can realize and understand why NPT was inherently discriminatory. So the then Indira Gandhi government rejected the NPT, and India made it very clear that we are never going to sign NPT. A similar stand was taken by Pakistan, later by Israel. So these three countries have never signed NPT. They have pursued their nuclear weapons program, and today they all possess nuclear weapons. While India, Pakistan have conducted nuclear tests and established their nuclear capabilities, Israel has never done so. It is widely believed that Israel does possess nuclear weapons, though it has not conducted a public test. Apart from India, Pakistan, Israel, we have South Sudan, which has never signed NPT. Not because it wants to pursue nuclear weapons, but South Sudan is a new country created in 2011 by the partition of Sudan. And since then, the country is going through a civil war. So it has never considered signing on to the NPT because of those reasons. So these are the four countries which have never signed Non-Proliferation Treaty. Then we have the curious case of North Korea. Initially, North Korea was a signatory to the NPT. It had signed on to the NPT, committing to never develop nuclear weapons. But as tensions increased between North and South Korea, and as tensions grew between North Korea and US, North Korea and Japan, in the 1980s, around 1984, North Korea exited the NPT. It is the only country till date which has signed NPT and later exited the NPT. Now, coming to our focus country, Iran. What is the status of Iran? Iran is a signatory to NPT, and it has remained committed, at least for some years, to the provisions and terms of NPT. So now the alleged covert nuclear weapons program of Iran, which has been going on from few decades, it is alleged to be in breach of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, thus making it an illegal nuclear weapons program. Now, in this context, we have to understand Iran's position on NPT and also evaluate Iran's changing ties with US and in particular Israel. This helps us understand the complex dynamics between these countries. And if we trace the entire background, you will be able to better understand what is happening currently. See, during the Second World War, Iran had shifted from a monarchy towards a parliamentary democracy. The then Iranian Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, was seen as a nationalist who would stand for Iranian pride, Iranian identity. And post Second World War, the Iranian Prime Minister nationalized the oil assets, the energy assets of Iran, which were previously controlled by imperial powers like Britain. So the nationalization of Iranian oil and gas assets was primarily done to boost the Iranian economy because this was a sovereign asset that belongs to the Iranian government, the Iranian people. But until then, it was looted, exploited by colonial powers like Britain. So once the Iranian Prime Minister nationalized these assets, Britain and Western powers, especially the United States, started seeing the Iranian democratic parliamentary regime as a threat for Western interests. as it would cripple their control over oil supplies and oil markets. So this led to hostility between Iran and the West during the Cold War period. By early 1950s, the Cold War rivalries had broken out, where the geopolitical world order was getting split between the Western Democratic Bloc and the Eastern Communist Bloc led by the USSR. So in 1950s, the United States blatantly carried out a regime change in 1953 to topple the Iranian parliamentary regime. Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh was kicked out of the country in a well-planned coup attempt that was engineered by the American intelligence agency, the CIA. This was a blatant regime change operation covertly executed by the American intelligence agency. So this government was now replaced by the monarchy. The Pahlavi dynasty, which had ruled Iran for several years prior to the institution of parliamentary politics. This monarchy system was brought back, and Shah Muhammad Reza Pahlavi of the Pahlavi dynasty was reinstated as the leader, the ruler of the country at the behest of the United States. So essentially, during the Cold War, by 1953, Iran became a puppet, a vassal state of the United States. So believe it or not, at that point, Iran and US enjoyed fantastic relations. Post the coup, once the Shah's regime was installed, the Shah would essentially be a pro-US leader, clearly aligned with Western interests. So naturally, Iran was very close to the US, and the US saw Iran as a strategic ally in West Asia. In fact, John F. Kennedy in 1960s would say that Iran is one of America's most important allies in the Middle East region. Now contrast that with the current ties between US and Iran. That's why I said it might be hard to believe. And also, as a result of the American influence, Iran was much more progressive, liberal as a society. Western cultural values were seeping in, and be it with regard to minority rights or women rights, Iran was more liberal and progressive and more secular in that regard. But the puppet regime of the Shah was gradually becoming unpopular day by day. People of Iran saw this regime as a Western puppet, and especially the conservative elements, conservative factions in Iran. They opposed the modern progressive liberalism that was being introduced. They thought of this as a threat to their religious and cultural identity. And I hope you know that Iran is primarily a Shia majority nation. It's also a leader of the Shia power bloc. So these Shia clerics, the conservative radical Shia clerics, would capitalize on the resentment that the people had, the masses of Iran had, and they would engineer the revolution of Iran, the Iranian Revolution of 1979. So following the Iranian Revolution, the Shah's regime was toppled. Shah Reza Pahlavi fled the country, and this revolutionary movement was hijacked by the radical conservative Shia clerics, and thus Iran came under a Islamic theological state. The supreme leader of the radical Shia clerics, Ayatollah al Khomeini, established himself as the supreme leader of the nation. Eventually, the Iranian government functioning under the supreme leader, the Ayatollah. The Iranian president would essentially report, and the Iranian government would function under the Ayatollah, the supreme leader of the country. Now, prior to the revolution, when the Shah's regime was present, given that Shah of Iran was completely aligned with US and Western interests, he had committed Iran to the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968. In fact, Iran had become one of the first countries in the region to sign the NPT and commit to never develop nuclear weapons. So this was one stage of Iran's engagement with NPT, where Iran was strongly committed to the NPT provisions and it had sworn never to develop nuclear weapons. But of course, this would change following the Iranian Revolution. Because following the Iranian Revolution, obviously the US became hostile to Iran. It tried to target the radical conservative regime. And Iran declared death to US and death to Israel. Given Iran's commitment, ideological commitment for the Palestinian cause to create a viable independent Palestinian state. Iran had been involved in backing and supporting the Palestinian movement as well. And once the conservative regime was installed, Iran firmly stood behind the Palestinian liberation movement and the terror outfits as well, eventually calling for death to US and Israel, creating a permanent divide in the West Asia region. Now, these were interesting times in 1970s, 1980s. The Middle East region was getting split, was getting divided. And if you look at the Sunni powers on the other side, the Sunni power bloc led by countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and the others, they secretly aligned with US and Israel as they perceived the Shia power bloc led by Iran as a strategic rival. So West Asia was clearly divided, with Shia power bloc on one side, led by Iran and its allies like Syria, parts of Iraq and Lebanon and others. On the other side, it would be US, Israel, and their Sunni allies, led by Saudi Arabia, UAE, and the others. So, from 1979 onwards, Iran's approach towards the region, towards Israel, and towards the US would change completely. Iran was dealt with an immediate threat post the revolution after it became a theological conservative state. When neighboring Iraq under Saddam Hussein launched a major war in 1980, which was fueled by the United States. Since the US was looking to topple the Iranian regime, it essentially enabled Saddam Hussein's war, trying to back the Iraqi war against Iran, leading to a 8-year conflict. And during this period, Saddam Hussein's regime had allegedly used chemical weapons in the conflict against Iranian forces. So these developments convinced Iran's regime that pursuing nuclear weapons is a necessity for the survival of the country. Given the fact that US was constantly targeting the Iranian regime, it was seen to be enabling Saddam Hussein during the Iraq-Iran conflict. And given the fact that Iraq deployed chemical weapons, allegedly, the war, it convinced Iran's leadership that they have to consider building nuclear weapons as a deterrent against US, Israel, and their interference. So, covertly, Iran began a secret nuclear weapons program, which was largely hidden from the rest of the world throughout 1980s, 1990s. Throughout this period, Iran remained committed to the NPT in the public domain. In front of the world, Iran kept saying that we are still committed to Non-Proliferation Treaty. But covertly, through secret methods, Iran was focusing on nuclear technology, trying to enrich the nuclear fuel that is needed to produce weapons-grade uranium, and eventually to build a warhead to create a deterrent for itself. This covert secret nuclear weapons program of Iran, it came out in the public domain in the year 2002 when few Iranian dissidents exposed the program. They blew the lid of this covert program. And again, allegedly, this was at the interference of the United States. Allegedly, US had encouraged few dissidents to come out and speak and provide evidence to the world to expose Iran's nuclear weapons program. So in 2002, Iran came under increased scrutiny because now it was clearly in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, as there was clear proof that Iran was indeed trying to pursue a nuclear weapons program. So immediately, Iran entered into an agreement with European powers such as France, Germany, and UK, and it committed to the additional protocol of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. The IAEA, which is headquartered in Vienna, Austria, it functions independently of the UN, but it reports to UN General Assembly and UN Security Council. The primary role of IAEA is to prevent the proliferation of nuclear technology, prevent the spread of nuclear weapons technology, whereas promote the safe usage and the sharing and cooperation of civilian nuclear technology. The IAEA also prescribes safety and security standards for nuclear facilities around the world. So Iran signed on to these protocols and agreements of IAEA, opening up itself for IAEA inspection, which would be monitored by European powers led by France, Germany, and UK. So this was an attempt by Iran to reach out to the West to convince them that Iran's nuclear program doesn't pose a threat. Because Iran's argument was its nuclear research was focused only on the civilian applications and not to develop a weapon. This helped in reducing the tension slightly. But as the US got more and more hostile, as Israel got more hostile towards Iran, in 2006, Iran rejected the inspection by IAEA inspectors and it started accelerating the nuclear enrichment to produce weapons grade uranium. And this was connected to what was happening in the region because Israel had never allowed Palestine to be set up as a viable independent nation. Israel had breached its commitment of a two nation or a two state solution concept. And in return, Iran had been backing the Palestinian revolutionary groups and terrorist organizations. Iran had cultivated multiple proxies from Hezbollah in Lebanon in the 1980s to Hamas in the Gaza Strip again in the 1980s. Iran was also known to back the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, which was a Palestinian terror outfit. All these extremist groups were funded, backed by Iran, as part of its regional strategy to target Israel, to counter Israel. And Israel was no less. Israel was not only decimating the Palestinian movement, but it was trying to target Iran and its allies through repeated covert attacks and even overt strikes. For example, uh, Iran had been hit quite severely by Israeli airstrikes and missile strikes, where Iranian assets in Syria, Iranian assets in Iraq were targeted. There was a nuclear facility in Iraq which would be essentially supplying some of the key components and raw materials to Iranian nuclear program. And Israel bombed these facilities in Iraq. It even targeted few facilities in Syria, which were allies of Iran. So throughout this period, from 1980s to early 2000, there were constant tensions between the Shia regime in Iran and Israel, and both sides were resorting to these tactics, overt and covert tactics, aimed at targeting and destabilizing each other. So now in 2006, Iran rejected IAEA inspection and accelerated the enrichment program, and this was immediately countered by US and Israel. From 2006 to 2014, US and Israel employed a variety of methods to disrupt Iran's nuclear program and to take a direct hit at the nuclear weapons program. The US brought crippling economic sanctions, which had a devastating impact on the Iranian economy. These sanctions primarily targeted the oil and gas exports of Iran, which was the lifeline of the Iranian economy. And it essentially was designed to cut off the funds for the Iranian regime, which could essentially be used to fuel the nuclear research and the weapons program in the country. Parallelly, US and Israel launched a series of covert attacks. Their intelligence agencies, the CIA and Mossad, respectively, they even carried out targeted assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists and top generals. They even engaged in cyber warfare. It is alleged that US and Israel covertly built a computer worm, a malware known as Stuxnet, which was infiltrated into Iranian computers and control systems that were used in nuclear facilities. So through Stuxnet, it is alleged that US and Israeli intelligence agencies, they gained remote access, remote control over the centrifuge plants in Iran. They managed to spin them out of control and even physically damage and destroy some of the centrifuges in Iran. This reportedly slowed down Iran's nuclear weapons program during this period. On one side, there were sanctions and constant international pressure, and parallelly, the covert attacks, the killing of the assassination of the scientists and top generals, and the cyber warfare campaign. It eventually helped in slowing down Iran's nuclear weapon program. Then finally, under the impact of the sanctions and international pressure, Iran agreed to negotiate. Iran agreed to open up for talks. And these talks were facilitated by the P5 plus 1 countries. The P5 plus 1 is a reference to the five permanent members of UNSC, and plus 1 refers to Germany. So US, Russia, China, and UK, France, along with Germany, plus the European Union, they negotiated with Iran the historic nuclear deal known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, also referred to as the Iran nuclear deal. Now, this brought back some stability in the relationship between US and Iran. Because prior to this, there was very high anticipation that a war might break out between US and Iran or Israel and Iran. As Iran was accelerating the weapons program, it was being widely reported that US Israel might consider military strikes similar to the ones you're seeing today. In fact, during this period of sanctions from 2006 to 2014, the then US administration under Barack Obama had exercised heavy pressure on India to cut off oil imports from Iran and to cut off our investments in Iran. Because see, please understand, Iran is a key ally for India, strategic partner. India had invested heavily in the Chabahar port of Iran in order to create alternate access to Afghanistan and beyond into Central Asia. India was one of the largest buyers of Iranian oil and gas. At that point, Iran was the second largest supplier of crude oil to India. And India had made investments in the energy sector of Iran. India's ONGC Videsh Limited had invested in the Farzad gas fields in the Persian Gulf near Hormuz Strait. Iran was critical for us to even counter terrorism and keep a check on Pakistan, and also keep a check on extremism in Afghanistan, especially to counter the Taliban. So the United States put a lot of pressure on India, but India, which follows an independent foreign policy, rejected the American sanctions as we do not follow unilateral sanctions. India bypassed the American sanctions, similar to how we have bypassed Western sanctions on Russia right now. And we continued our oil trade, our investments, and we worked out alternate payment systems, used alternate currencies. We even established a rupee based trading system and a barter type of exchange system so that Iran India relations could continue. So, this nuclear deal, the JCPOA, which was worked out in 2015, was a big relief for India as well. Because we would no longer be caught between US and Iran or Iran and Israel. India could engage with Iran more freely and openly. And this reduced the tensions and it almost ended the possibility of a conflict. Because under the nuclear deal, Iran had promised to stop the enrichment of highly enriched uranium. And whatever stockpile was present, Iran agreed to hand over the enriched uranium stockpile to France and European powers. And in return, they would supply civilian nuclear fuel and nuclear technology to Iran, which could be used only for power generation and for medical and industrial applications. In return, the US had agreed to lift the sanctions, and this brought back some stability in the relationship and it had stabilized the region. But Donald Trump, during his first presidency, unilaterally quit the JCPOA and reimposed crippling sanctions on Iran without a valid reason. Trump alleged that US had intelligence to believe that Iran was still secretly building a nuclear weapon. But this claim of Donald Trump was dismissed by the other partners of JCPOA, UK, France and Germany and European Union, along with Russia and China, who are also party to the agreement. They dismissed these claims of the US because every possible report indicated that Iran was being committed to the deal. It had stopped the enrichment, it had started moving out the enriched fuel to France in exchange only for civilian nuclear technology. The IAEA, which was conducting inspections, Iran had reopened all the facilities for IAEA inspectors. They also certified that Iran is abiding by the deal. But Donald Trump rejected all these arguments and unilaterally quit the deal just to favor Israel, given the political alliance between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. Trump was known to push Israeli interests even during his first presidency in blatant disregard with regard to stability in West Asia. So eventually, crippling sanctions were brought back on Iran, and this significantly hit the Iranian economy. This time, Donald Trump forced every other country, including India, to zero out oil imports. And India, probably for the first time with regard to economic sanctions, fell under Western pressure, under American pressure, and we were forced by the US to cut off oil trade. We almost brought down our imports, energy imports from Iran to zero. And this even instigated Iran, and India Iran relations were affected during this period. So, since then, the tensions have been building up. During Trump's presidency, after the sanctions were brought back, US carried out few precision hits to eliminate few top generals in Iranian regime. For example, the then leader of the Quds Force, elite unit of IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, Qasim Soleimani, was eliminated in a US airstrike. This significantly increased the tensions, and again, the possibility of war was looming over the region. Iran was looking to retaliate. Iran was looking to step up the pressure. But once Trump's presidency ended and President Biden took over, fresh attempts were started, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, to restart the negotiations over the nuclear deal and to restore the status quo of JCPOA. But however, these talks could never be the focus of US because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict that broke out in 2022. The nuclear talks didn't progress much And before anything substantial could be worked out, West Asia was shaken by the biggest shocking development in 2023, the October 7th terrorist attack by Hamas, which is an Iranian proxy. The deadly attack, where 1,300 Israeli innocent civilians were slaughtered by this radical terror outfit, it had a devastating impact and it pushed Israel into a brutal war, a war which has gone way beyond control, a war where Israel has used disproportionate force targeting even civilians, with the death count reaching 50,000 plus, with 2 million people plus displaced, and Israel accused of committing war crimes and a genocide. Now, Israel has taken the war to the next level in the last couple of years, where it has decimated another proxy of Iran, Hezbollah, that primarily operates from Lebanon. It has targeted another proxy of Iran, the Houthis of Yemen, and it has even resorted to strikes against Iran. The last couple of years, there have been few limited skirmishes directly between Israel and Iran. So Israel was taking aim at Iran cities and military facilities or Iranian leadership, and Iran, and Iran also has retaliated in the last few months. But in these skirmishes, Israel never targeted the nuclear facilities. Israel never took direct aim at the nuclear facilities of Iran. So it was kept within the controllable limits. But now, what has happened in the last few months and in the last few days, something that is shocking, that is quite unprecedented. See, in the last few weeks, the United States, after Donald Trump came back for a second term, US had restarted nuclear talks with Iran, and these talks were taking place in a neutral country, in Oman. Few rounds of talks had taken place in Oman, also in Austria, and according to reports, US Iran were coming close to a possible deal, maybe a new deal, which could be upgradation of JCPOA, under which Iran would agree to shut its nuclear enrichment. And in return, US would lift the sanctions in an attempt to bring some stability and normalcy in the relationship and in the region. Because see, when US quit the JCPOA and became hostile to Iran and targeted Iran again, Iran also started breaching the commitments. Within the ambit of JCPOA, Iran was allowed to enrich uranium up to around 20% in case of disputes arising. So US quitting unilaterally was a dispute, and Iran invoked that provision of the deal, and it started enriching uranium up to 20%. And now there have been reports that Iran has managed to enrich significant quantities of uranium up to 60%. So this became the prime reason for Israel to consider that Iran is an imminent threat, that Iran might procure nuclear weapons anytime. Because from 60% enriched uranium, you're just a short step away from acquiring 90% highly enriched uranium, which is weapons grade uranium. That is what you need to build a nuclear warhead. So anywhere between few weeks to few months, Iran would have been possibly able to build probably one or maybe few warheads. So Israel presumed this to be a threat, and it has launched deadly strikes over the last 10 days, starting from 13th June. So if you look at the map here, you will understand what kind of targets have been hit by Israel. And that helps us put things in context. Israel has conducted precision strikes, first aimed at the leadership. It carried out intelligence based airstrikes using missiles and drones, some drones that were launched inside Iran itself, which were secretly smuggled and built by the Mossad inside Iran. And they eliminated some of the top nuclear scientists and generals of the IRGC in order to cripple the nuclear program. This was followed by precision strikes on several nuclear facilities in Tehran, the capital. Israel even tried targeting the Fordo enrichment plant, but Israel could not succeed. Why? Because the Fordo enrichment facility is deeply secured. Iran has built this nuclear facility deeply underground under a mountain structure, and Israel doesn't have the capabilities to penetrate so deep into the ground to cause any damage to the nuclear plant. But other facilities in Natanz, in Isfahan, and other nuclear sites, including several military bases, were repeatedly hit by Israel over the last 10 days using a combination of airstrikes through fighter jets and ballistic missiles and as well as drones. Of course, Iran would not take this lying down, and Iran mounted a serious response, a major retaliation over the last couple of weeks. Iran has fired hundreds and hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones and projectiles. It has even breached the air defense systems of Israel. Several projectiles have hit key targets in Israel as well, from Tel Aviv to Haifa. Several important commercial, strategic, military facilities have been targeted. And as a result, the tensions have escalated, and it was almost appearing that Iran and Israel are prepared for a full fledged war, a full fledged conflict. And just the other day, Israel has hit a few other nuclear facilities, including the facilities at Isfahan. That's what is reported in the Hindu newspaper today. But other than that, there has been another shocking development just a few hours ago, in the early hours of today morning. We received a confirmation that United States was looking to enter the conflict, which has completely backed Israel's targeting of Iran. It had moved the B-2 strategic bombers to the Guam Air Base in the Pacific. And as expected, the US itself has now entered the conflict today morning, launching precision strikes at Iran's nuclear facilities. Around 6 B-2 bombers reportedly have breached Iranian airspace, and they have used the notorious GBU 57, which you can see here, which is considered as one of the world's most powerful ordnance after nuclear weapons. This massive ordnance penetrator is designed to be a bunker buster, and only the US possesses such a weapon. A massive weapon which can penetrate several meters of concrete, rock, and underground facilities and hit the targets deep, which are concealed within the earth. Israel was requesting for these bunker busters from a long time, but instead of transferring the weapons, the US has directly entered the conflict, and Donald Trump has officially announced that US has hit nuclear facilities of Iran, including the deeply protected Fordo enrichment facility. As of now, we are not aware of the extent of the damage, but US has also hit Natanz and Isfahan, and these major nuclear centers probably would have suffered significant damage. Israel had already caused significant damage at Isfahan and Natanz, and now US would have definitely caused significant damage at Fordo. Now, this raises two big risks. One is the possibility of a bigger conflict that has dragged US, and that has been Israeli intention to try and drag the US into this conflict so that they could push for the decimation of Iran, possibly another regime change in Iran. Because Israeli leaders like Netanyahu and others have publicly spoken about this. They have advocated regime change in Iran from many, many years. So Israeli strikes that were carried out on 13 June has largely been seen as without provocation, as Iran had not directly attacked Israel, and Iran was still some distance away from a nuclear weapon. It's Israel which actually possesses nuclear weapons in the region, not Iran. But Israel has called it a preemptive strike, a strike in self-defense. And it was trying to drag the US, and they've managed to successfully do that. So there is a possibility of a bigger war if Iran chooses to escalate and retaliate. And the other concern, the big concern, is the possibility of nuclear contamination. Israel and US have blatantly struck nuclear facilities without any concern about the possible nuclear leakage and radioactive contamination. In fact, all the countries in the region have been panicking. For example, Iran has nuclear facilities along the coastline as well, which Israel has taken aim at. If at all there is a contamination and leakage of the radioactive material into the Persian Gulf, this could contaminate the waters of the Persian Gulf, which is the lifeline for countries like Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar. Because they all rely on desalination for drinking water. They take the sea water, desalinate, and use it for drinking purposes. They have no other water sources. So, any possible nuclear contamination or a larger escalation of the war could have very serious, unimaginable consequences for the region and the world. Right now, US Israel striking these facilities without a concern about possible radioactive contamination is something that is deeply alarming. And Iran's insistence as well to keep on pursuing the weapons program, even at the risk of a bigger escalation, is equally riskier. So there are no saints in this conflict. Iran is as much guilty as Israel and US in aggravating and escalating the conflict and the tensions, which today has made the world more and more unstable. Now the question is, how close was Iran really to a nuclear bomb? Was Israel and US, were they telling the truth? As I told you, Iran had started enriching uranium up to 20% after breaking the terms of the deal, after invoking the provisions of JCPOA, after the US had quit the deal. Now it was reported that Iran was producing 60% highly enriched uranium. From here, as I said, it's just one step away to produce 90% highly enriched uranium, which is what we call as weapons grade uranium. Now, Iran would take at least few weeks to few months to produce sufficient weapons grade uranium to build at least one warhead, which means Iran was at least few weeks to few months away from trying to build a nuclear bomb. But again, just having weapons grade uranium is not enough. Parallelly, you need to build a bomb, a delivery system, which again would have taken sufficient time. Though Iran has been developing this parallelly, it would still take some time to master the technology and mate the warhead with a bomb and to have a deployable arsenal. It would have definitely taken at least few years, or maybe even never, or at least till the end of the year. Which means Iran was not an imminent threat as Israel has projected, as the US has been projecting. There were still possibilities of talks. As we discussed, the talks in Oman was actually progressing well. And it was reported just 2, 3 weeks ago that US Iran are approaching a possible deal. Iran would have agreed to shut down the enrichment, hand over all the enriched stockpile if US had lifted the sanctions. This could have been resolved peacefully. Iran probably would have never continued the pursuit of nuclear weapons. Because please understand, officially, Iranian leadership has never declared that they would seek the pursuit of nuclear weapons. Though they have attempted it covertly, they were still miles away from actually building a deployable arsenal. They were still several months or at least few years away from threatening Israel and US. And when diplomacy was succeeding, when talks were taking place in Oman, Israeli strikes has been completely unjustified in this regard. Most experts agree that it is Israel which has triggered an unnecessary aggression. Because look at the larger interests of Israel. If the talks had succeeded between Trump's administration and Iran, Iran would remain a formidable threat to Israel, right? And just to gain that edge over Iran and use this opportunity to decimate its nuclear program forever, Israel has taken matters into its own hands, violated international law. This is a serious breach of international law. The UN Charter doesn't allow such unilateral strikes. Though Israel is claiming it was a preemptive strike, it was in self defense. But that applies only when there has already been an attack and you're defending yourself, or if there is a very imminent threat. And neither existed in this case. Neither was there an imminent threat from Iran's nuclear weapons. Iran was months or years away from actually having deployable nuclear arsenal. And Iran had not carried out any instigation or aggression as of now. So these strikes by Israel, which now has been backed by US, has essentially broken the peace process. The talks have completely collapsed. And though Trump has given a 2 week window, and even after the strikes of today's morning, Trump has again sent out a message, apparently through back channels, warning Iran that US is not looking for escalation, that US doesn't want to enter a bigger war. Essentially, US is offering an olive branch, a possible way out of this conflict. And if Iran can take that, maybe there might be a deal and maybe the tensions will go down. But looking at things, the way in which Iran has been targeted and humiliated jointly by Israel and US, it's highly unlikely that Iran is going to stay silent. Iran would look for retaliation, it would look for revenge against Israel and even the US right now. And that is what really worries and alarms everyone. Because this could push and plunge the region into a much, much bigger conflict, which the world doesn't need as of now. So let's see what can Iran do as of now. One, Iran can consider direct military strikes, which it has already been doing against Israel with great success. The much praised air defense systems, including the Iron Dome, the Arrow of Israel, have been defeated, and many Iranian projectiles have managed to strike key targets in Israel. So Iran could step up this fight. But however, Iran does have limitations. For example, it doesn't have capable fighter jets, travel the distance, doesn't have mid-air refueling as well to carry out direct airstrikes using fighter jets. So that is a limitation for Iran. But still, Iran possesses a massive arsenal of missiles, drones, and it can inflict very serious, significant damage to Israel. And of course, Israel would not sit back. It would try to mount a massive strike, a sustained operation, possibly designed to decimate the country, to break the regime itself, try to push for change of the government itself. The US would also would get more actively involved. The US has already moved its key military assets in the region. There have been reports that even Britain has started moving its aircraft carrier to this region. So Iran has an option to strike US and Western military targets. In the region, US has number of military bases. For example, in Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, in UAE, there are major military bases of the US right across Iran. In Djibouti as well, in Horn of Africa. Then there are several locations in Syria, Iraq, and Jordan and Saudi Arabia where American troops are present. So these American military facilities, military assets, maybe American naval ships in Gulf of Oman, in Persian Gulf, or the aircraft carriers of the US, the naval bases, they could be targeted by Iran. And if that happens, then US would also enter the war. There are discussions possibly regarding a possible invasion, something like what we saw in 2003 when US invaded Iraq. Though it's not confirmed, though US has never acknowledged it, it's being reported that US is considering every possibility that if Iran escalates, that US is likely prepared for a invasion as well if necessary with Israel, try and push for regime change. The other option, if not for the military option, is to block the Hormuz Strait, the strategic Hormuz Strait. See, today we have articles in the paper regarding the importance of the Hormuz Strait. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow choke point, a vulnerable maritime choke point that connects the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman. It's a vital shipping route, a vital trade link, and it carries nearly 25% of world's oil supplies. If you include LNG, natural gas, it easily carries around 50% or more than 50% of global energy supplies. This shipping route is absolutely critical for energy trade. Almost 20 million barrels of oil is passing through it per day. The global economy is dependent on it. Oil prices are dependent on it. In fact, back in 1980s, when the Iran-Iraq war took place, both Iran and Iraq had resorted to what we call as the tanker war, where they were targeting the ships, the tanker ships passing through this region, which were carrying oil and gas. Because see, all the littorals of Persian Gulf are dependent on Hormuz. Be it Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, even Iraq, UAE, all these countries, they push their oil gas supplies through Persian Gulf, which is so vital for the global economy. And Iran is in a vital location, a strategic location where it can control the Hormuz Strait because it's a very narrow strait, hardly 55 to 95 kilometers wide. Iran has sufficient naval capabilities to easily impose a blockade and block out Hormuz and even prevent the movement of ships completely. Because we have seen some precedents. During the Iran Iraq war, both Iran and Iraq had targeted the oil carrying ships and tankers to bring global pressure and to create global chaos during the conflict. So that is something which the world is worried about. This could completely disrupt the global economy, which is already going through a crisis. Even recently, between 2006 and 2020, whenever tensions existed between US and Iran, Iran had made attempts to target some ships, to detain some of the containers and the tanker ships passing through. But there has never been a blockade of Hormuz in history. Few tankers and ships have been targeted. That itself caused complete chaos in the global oil markets. Now imagine what could happen if Hormuz is blocked for the first time ever, and Iran can potentially do that. Other than that, Iran could even consider quitting the Non-Proliferation Treaty like North Korea. At the start of the discussion, I told you, except for North Korea, no country has ever quit NPT after signing it. Now, Iran could be the second. As of now, at least officially, Iran has remained committed to NPT. It is still part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But by invoking Article 10 of NPT, where a country, a signatory can cite extraordinary events which are threatening its sovereignty, its interests, on these grounds, Iran can try to exit NPT, just like North Korea did. Because clearly what Israel has done, its unnecessary aggression and blatant violation of international law, can be constituted as an extraordinary event by Iran, and it can invoke the provisions of Article 10 of NPT and quit the Non-Proliferation Treaty. This could create more chaos in global geopolitics. And if Iran accelerates the nuclear program going forward, because see, no matter what happens, be it a war, be it a peace process, eventually Iran will go ahead with its pursuit of nuclear weapons in the long run. That is guaranteed now. Because given what Israel has done, the way in which Israel US have attacked Iran, Iran would have determined itself, or it would have realized for itself that without nuclear weapons, there is no survival for the state. Maybe otherwise, if not for these strikes in the last 10 days, maybe Iran was open to the path of talks. And that's why progress was taking place at the talks in Oman. A deal would have possibly brought the nuclear pursuit to an end. But now that these countries have blatantly attacked Iran, violated its sovereignty, humiliated the country as well by taking out the top leadership, now Iran would double down on the resolve to develop nuclear weapons at any cost. Maybe it could take 20, 30 years down the line, but this could possibly push Iran to more strictly pursue nuclear weapons in the coming days, which is a big destabilizing factor. And if Iran does this outside the NPT, by quitting NPT, this could create an imbalance in the global order and trigger a global arms race. We could see the return of a global nuclear arms race because Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons could push Israel to accelerate its own program, right? Pakistan would do the same. India, China would respond to it by accelerating their own weapons program. And eventually, US, Russia, UK, France, the other nuclear powers would also engage in an arms race. And that could be destabilizing for the world. See, right now, no major power wants a nuclear Iran. Even Iran's allies, like Russia and China, though they support Iran in every possible manner, Russia, China also have said that we don't wish to see Iran getting nuclear weapons. Even India, which itself pursued a similar path back in 60s, 70s, 80s, because we broke NPT, we violated NPT, we never signed it. India pursued a path and it was treated as a rogue path that India pursued. India was targeted at that point through technological economic sanctions. In fact, when we carried out the nuclear test, the second test at Pokhran in 98, India was hit with crippling economic and technological sanctions. But gradually, India has moved out of that image. We have established the credibility of our program. We managed to transform the ties with US in particular. Because similarly, US was at one point derailing and targeting our nuclear program as well, just like they've done with Iran. But now, India may not be able to sympathize or understand Iran's position. Though India does take a balanced position on this, India would not wish to see a nuclear Iran as well. Because a nuclear Iran could trigger an arms race, could destabilize the balance between India, Pakistan, India, China with regard to the nuclear arsenal they have. But one thing is very clear: the collusion of Israel, US, their blatant actions, the aggression that they have shown, which is unjustified as well under international law, and without a direct trigger from Iran. Because see, Israel was already winning the ongoing conflict. If not winning, at least it clearly had an upper hand. It had decimated Iranian proxies like Hamas in Gaza. It had decimated Hezbollah in Lebanon. It had clearly targeted the Houthis in Yemen, even delivered major hits against Iran directly. So there was no need for such an escalation at a time when the talks were progressing. US Iran were getting closer to a final deal, which could have actually stabilized the situation, possibly ended all the conflicts going on in West Asia. But it's very clear, the intention of Israel is very clear. It has tried to disrupt the talks. Nothing else. Israel didn't want a deal between US and Iran. It's as simple as that. Which again highlights the aggression, the military aggression of Israel, which is threatening the region. Israel has essentially derailed the path of diplomacy, pushed the region towards a bigger conflict with possible nuclear consequences. And this has serious implications for the whole region, as I told you, right? The destabilization of the global oil markets, the global economy, the spread of the wider conflict, dragging US into the war, resulting in possibly a perpetual conflict, which could permanently destabilize this region for many years to come. That is the risk we are staring at. And for India, this has very, very serious implications and concerns. Let's talk about the economic implications first. India has a great deal of dependency on the Strait of Hormuz. India doesn't have sufficient hydrocarbon reserves. Almost 85% of our energy is imported. And out of that, 40% of our crude oil import is coming from Hormuz Strait. 54% of the natural gas import is coming from the Hormuz Strait. Because these countries are the key suppliers of oil and gas to India. Be it Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iraq, Qatar, Bahrain, all of them are major suppliers to India. Though we zeroed out oil import from Iran under American pressure, the other West Asian powers have remained key suppliers, with 40 to 54% of our energy imports coming from this region, coming through the Hormuz Strait. So any blockade or any destabilization here is going to completely disrupt and destroy the Indian economy. Oil prices will shoot up, our import bill would increase, the logistics cost will go up, cost of transportation, the cost of shipping, insurance, and security cost for maritime shipping would increase because the disruption in maritime shipping would definitely increase the cost of transportation and logistics. This will translate to costlier imports, less competitive exports of India, even resulting in inflation, causing macroeconomic destabilization. But of course, India is confident that we can tide over the crisis because, see, as of now, we consume around 5.5 million oil barrels per day, out of which 1.5 million barrels is passing through Hormuz Strait. But India is confident if at all the crisis breaks out and Hormuz is disrupted, we can shift these supplies to other alternate suppliers. We do procure oil gas from others in Africa. We have Russia, we have others, even Venezuela and others. So India is already actively looking for alternate supplies and supplying routes so we can reduce our dependency on Hormuz if the need arises. But this definitely has bigger implications. This could hit the trade relations we already have with Iran and Israel. See, Iran, Israel, they have been minor trading partners for India. They're not major trading partners. For example, with Iran, I think we had around a trade relationship of $14 billion, right? Most of it was oil and gas. But after we zeroed out, the trade volume has fallen to just around $1 billion, which is almost negligible. With Israel as well, though Israel is an important defense and strategic partner, we have procured a lot of weapons and defense systems from Israel. The trade, overall economic trade, has been limited to hardly around $3 billion right now. It was somewhere around 15 billion before, but because of all the war and tensions, our trade has reduced with Israel to just around $3 to $4 billion. So bilateral trade is quite negligible. It's okay. We can still manage this. We can take this impact. But don't forget, both Israel and Iran are strategically vital for India. We already understood why Iran is important. Be it the strategic ports like Chabahar, be it the connectivity projects, which I'm going to mention, or even to keep a check on Pakistan, counter terrorism in the AFPAC region, to have connectivity with Central Asia. Iran was absolutely crucial for India, key partner. Similarly, Israel has been a key defense strategic partner. Israel has supplied critical weapon systems to India over the years, from advanced AWOC systems like the Falcon to air defense systems like Barak, and even precision guided missiles, which we have used in recent times against Pakistan. Be it during Balkot airstrikes or during Operation Sindhu, India has effectively employed Israeli precision guided ammunition. The Israeli drones, the Searcher, the, uh, the Heron, and the Harop and Harpy drones, right? Which includes the loitering munition, which India has effectively used in recent operations against Pakistan. So Israel has been a key collaborator with India for intelligence sharing, counter-terrorism, and we have very close ties in education, research, science and tech, innovation. So it's very hard for India to choose sides between them. And also there is the larger balancing act that we have to perform, the diplomatic tightrope that we have to walk. On one hand, US, Israel are very crucial for India. At the same time, Iran, other West Asian powers, especially Sunni powers, Russia, China, are also equally important. Now, how do you ensure you don't offend the other when you take a side, let's say, with one side? Recently, after Israel's strikes on Iran, important groupings like BRICS and SCO, they have issued statements condemning Israel, blaming Israel for the aggression. Because BRICS consists of Iran itself today. Iran has become a member. Iran is a member of SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And it has the support of allies like Russia and Iran. And they have pushed statements through BRICS and SCO criticizing Israel, blaming Israel entirely. But India has distanced itself from these statements. Since India is also a key member of BRICS and SCO, we don't want to be appearing to be part of this condemnation. So India has distanced itself from these statements to try and show that we are taking a balanced position. Recently, at the United Nations, a ceasefire resolution was pushed in Gaza. Most countries of the world, most major powers supported it, except for US, and India abstained from it. All the members of BRICS, SCO, even our neighbors from SARC, all the G7 countries except the US, even developed European powers, they all backed this UN resolution calling for Gaza ceasefire. But India curiously abstained from it. And this is a departure from India's historical position. Historically, India has often voted in favor of Palestine, in favor of Arab states, to maintain that balance with the Sunni powers, with the West Asian powers, while trying to protect the ties with Israel. We have never condemned Israel's disproportionate use of force or openly blamed Israel for the crisis. At the same time, we have never blamed Iran or even Saudi Arabia and others and Qatar for the sponsorship of few radical groups which have targeted Israel. So India has maintained that balanced position historically. But of late, it appears India is clearly departing from that position, where we are not only staying away from criticizing Israel, we are distancing from these critical statements, but we are also abstaining from key UN votes, even on issues related to Gaza. Now, this was not India's historic position. On the question of Palestine, India would have quite frequently voted against Israel in the past, especially when it was accused of disproportionate force, human rights violations, or the illegal occupation of Palestinian territories. On these matters, India would always vote against Israel at one point. So this change in position indicates the balancing act of India. And the perpetuation of this conflict and a bigger war will make it even more difficult for us to balance the ties between US Israel on one side, Iran and its allies on the other side. This could hit our strategic connectivity projects, the Chabahar Port Project, the INSTC corridor, the International North South Transport Corridor that passes from Iran to Russia, which India sees as vital to create a shorter link with Europe, to reduce our dependency on Suez Canal and the Red Sea route. Because Suez Canal Red Sea route is very vulnerable. That itself is a major choke point. It's a longer, costlier route. INSTC could open up a shorter and more reliable alternate route. So without Iran, there's no way of going ahead with such projects. And even the IMEC corridor that was proposed at the G20 in 2023, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, which would have included countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Israel. This seems impossible right now, given the conflict and tensions that we have seen in the last 2 years in this region. So all these strategic connectivity projects have taken a big hit. And it's not just that. We are seeing some disturbing developments as far as US Pakistan relations are concerned in the context of Iran Israel tensions. And that is what worries India. You might have heard that Pakistani army chief, now who has elevated himself to the rank of a field marshal, was invited to the White House by US President Donald Trump for a lunch. And this comes right in the backdrop of PM Modi attending the G7 in Canada. Later, he held a telephonic conversation with Donald Trump. Trump reportedly invited Modi to visit Washington, but Prime Minister Modi refused because of his prior commitments. But Prime Minister Modi made it clear to Donald Trump that US did not play any role or it did not mediate in the ceasefire that we had called following Operation Sindhu. PM Modi had sought to directly clarify this position that India Pakistan had bilaterally worked out the ceasefire and it was Pakistan which was requesting India for a ceasefire. Prime Minister Modi tried to dismiss the claims of Trump because Trump has been claiming credit for this from several weeks. But Trump being Trump, immediately after talking to Prime Minister Modi, he tweeted again claiming credit for the ceasefire between India and Pakistan. He has not only tried playing the role of a mediator, he has even offered to mediate over the Kashmir issue, which is a position that's unacceptable to India. Because we have always maintained that any third party involvement is something that India will not encourage. This is integral to the Shimla Agreement between India and Pakistan, that any bilateral issue, including Kashmir, will be discussed only bilaterally with no third party involvement. But now, Pakistan has been gaining a better leverage following Pahalgam attack and Operation Sindoor, as Donald Trump has equated India Pakistan. He has put India Pakistan at the same level. The dehyphenation that we had achieved after decades of effort now appears to have been reversed, where US is now again looking at India Pakistan as equals on an equal footing. Donald Trump has praised Pakistan and Asim Munir and sees Pakistan as a equivalent power to India. And that marks a big strategic setback. Because now, following this meet, you might have heard Pakistan has nominated Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize for playing the role of a mediator to achieve the ceasefire between India and Pakistan, a claim which India has repeatedly denied. Now there is speculation that if at all Iran escalates the war, if Iran goes for a full-fledged conflict, right? And if it doesn't accept the peace process that Trump is proposing, there is a likelihood that US might even consider a full-scale invasion with Israel's backing. And in such a scenario, US would need one country, that is Pakistan. Because if the US has to consider a full-scale invasion, and to move troops and provide logistical support to the troops, Pakistan would be critical. Since Iran would block out Hormuz Strait, if at all American troops have to easily reach and access Iranian borders, it will be through the Pakistani border. So there is intense speculation going on that did this meeting have a bigger agenda, bigger purpose? Has US asked Asim Munir to work with US, help US in carrying out an invasion of Iran? And what will happen if Pakistan agrees to it? That will make Pakistan pivotal for the US. Pakistan's value becomes all the more important, and that would be a setback for India. We have seen this in the past when US depended on Pakistan to lead its war in Afghanistan, to topple the Taliban regime, to target Al Qaeda. From 2001 to 2021, US depended heavily on Pakistan for intelligence support, military support, and even logistical support. So if the same repeats again, Pakistan becomes all the more valuable to the US. And that will it will basically erase or erode decades of progress that we have made in India US relationship. That will put Pakistan at an equal footing, or maybe Pakistan could become even more valuable. And that would be a big setback for India. And that again leads us to think, did Pahalgam attack have a larger conspiracy behind it? Right? It again leads to speculations that was there a larger agenda in pushing India to attack Pakistan, try to drag US into talks between India and Pakistan and try to mediate a ceasefire. So US will get some sort of leverage over Pakistan and use that to convince Pakistan to give access to target Iran. So though it remains in the realm of speculation, conspiracy theories, it does lead to these uncomfortable questions, right? Then the Indian community will bear the full brunt of this as well. We have 10 million Indians residing, working across West Asian countries, one of the largest diaspora community that we have. But fortunately, in Iran, Israel, the numbers are pretty low. We have around 10,000 Indians, primarily students, medical students, who study in various Iranian colleges. Around 25,000 Indians in Israel, working in the construction sector and also in the caregiving sector. Because after the Gaza war started, Israel, it basically removed all the Palestinian workers and it has tried replacing with cheap labor from India. So it signed a labor contract with India, and thousands of Indian migrant workers have been sent to work in Israel's construction sector and other blue collar sectors, and even nurses, Indian nurses, to provide care, elderly care for Israeli citizens. So we have a significant Indian diaspora here, 10,000 in Iran, 25,000 in Israel. And don't forget, 40% of our total remittances is coming from West Asia. India receives more than $100 billion in remittances. 40% of it, 40 to $50 billion essentially, is coming from this region. So any impact on the diaspora will bring down the remittance flow into India, which further has an economic impact. We have a $170 billion trade relationship with all the West Asian countries that could take a hit. The Sunni powers, Saudi Arabia, others are watching India's position as well. India has remained silent as of now, trying to strike a balancing act, whereas all the Sunni powers are now rallying behind Iran and they're clearly against Israeli aggression. So they might view this as India's tilt towards US and Israel, which could be bad for India's long-term ties with West Asian powers. Now, to rescue the Indian diaspora who are trapped in the conflict zone, we have launched an evacuation mission, Operation Sindhu, which is also reported in today's newspapers. Under Operation Sindhu, India managed to secure an exemption from Iran to open up the airspace, which had been shut. Following Israeli strikes, Iran's airspace was completely shut. And for India, exemption has been made, even for some other countries, to provide for these evacuation missions. India has been trying to take out the students and the Indians who are trapped in Iran to neighboring countries like Yerevan in Armenia, to Ashgabat in Turkmenistan, and also to Qatar. From here, India has been airlifting the Indian nationals. India has even received a request from neighboring countries like Nepal and Sri Lanka to rescue their citizens as well, because they don't have such capabilities. So in the past, India has done this. For example, when Lebanon went through a civil war in 2005, when we launched operation to rescue them, right? Operation Sukoon. We not only rescued Indian citizens from Lebanon, from the conflict zone, we even rescued citizens of Nepal, Sri Lanka, and others. In Yemen also, in 2014, when the Houthis took over the country and thousands of Indians were rescued under Operation Rahat, we rescued many foreign citizens as well. Even few Western citizens were rescued at the request of Western governments. So now we are rescuing even Nepali, Sri Lankan citizens, rescuing them from Iran by using Yerevan in Armenia, Qatar, and Ashgabat in Turkmenistan. There has also been a report that a group of Indians who are working in Israel who are being trapped in the conflict zone, they have crossed into Egypt through the Taba land port. Please mark this location, can be very important for your prelims. Through the Taba border crossing between Israel and Egypt, a large group of Indians have crossed over into Egypt, where they have been rescued by the Indian embassy and now they are being brought back to India. So, this is a large scale operation that's going on. Under Operation Sindhu, we are rescuing Indians, not just from Iran, but also from Israel. So this evacuation mission spans both Iran and Israel, and this again highlights the concerns for India. So let's see what happens in the coming days, but please take up this practice question. Try to write an answer based on what we have discussed. So this has been a prolonged discussion. It has something which is relevant for prelims and mains, and that's why I feel the topic is very relevant, very important. Now let's quickly look at the other small articles today, and we'll wrap up the discussion very soon. We have this article on the Forest Rights Act of 2006. The Forest Rights Act was championed by the then UPA government mainly to secure tribal rights, to promote tribal welfare. Under the Forest Rights Act, an honest attempt was made by the government to secure tribal rights for forest dwelling tribes, forest dwelling communities. Under this act, land title rights were supposed to be provided, which would essentially formalize, legalize the forest dwelling rights of tribal indigenous communities in the country. Because for decades they have faced the risk of eviction, especially on environmental grounds. But the Forest Rights Act would recognize the title rights, the land rights of indigenous tribal communities to dwell and reside in forest areas. It would also recognize their livelihood rights, giving them access to forest areas and allowing them to even collect minor forest produce, which is part of tribal livelihood. The tribals generally they used to rely on hunting, poaching, right? But hunting, poaching was prohibited through our environmental laws like the Wildlife Protection Act. So most tribals they shifted towards basic agriculture, collection of forest produce. They would collect the fruits, berries, tendu leaves, especially tobacco leaves, essentially, right? So that would be the primary livelihood of these tribal communities. But further environmental restrictions, they were crippling the rights of the tribes and access to economic opportunities. So under the law, these livelihood rights were recognized, where tribes could collect the minor forest produce and commercially exploit them to sustain their livelihood. It also recognizes community rights. It recognizes the right of the community to conserve the forest. It basically respects the traditional link between tribes and forests, tribes and nature. Tribal communities, indigenous groups are known to worship their environment and surroundings. They worship the forest, the mountains, the rivers, the animals, and the birds. They play a big role in conservation because whatever tribal communities extract from nature, it is sustainable. They don't overexploit. So there has been that harmony, that symbiotic relationship between indigenous tribes and forests. So the Forest Rights Act was an attempt to try and restore that balance, to allow the tribes to dwell, reside in forest areas, to support their access to minor forest produce and livelihood, while recognizing their right to conserve and protect the forest and even worship the forest. Now, this is in news in the context of Naxalism in central India. The government of India has declared a very ambitious target to ensure a Naxal Mukt Bharat by March 2026. India has been mounting major counterinsurgency operations in the last few months. Under Operation Black Forest, we have eliminated the top leadership of Naxals. So while the security operations continue and we are about to defeat Naxalism, on the verge of breaking Naxalism entirely, parallelly, it's important to understand and acknowledge and address some of the root causes that contributed to Naxalism in these forested areas. One reason why tribal communities supported Naxals was because their land was snatched, they were evicted and displaced, they were not compensated. Their livelihood was curbed because of various laws and policies and poor governance and administration. Now, a law like Forest Rights Act will help in countering extremism as well. By securing these indigenous rights, these traditional rights to the tribes, you can win the support of the tribal communities, and the government has been accelerating the implementation of the Forest Rights Act. See, until recently, the state governments were playing a bigger role in the implementation of FRA rights. But of late, given that the center is now aiming to completely end Naxalism, the center is now directly playing a role in the implementation of FRA rights. It has been pushing the concerned state governments in central eastern parts of India to scale up the entitlement rights which are being given under FRA so that it can address the local livelihood concerns, address the land related issues, recognize tribal rights, so that you can pull the community away from any kind of influence from Naxalism. The ground support for Naxalism can be taken out. And that's why FRA can be crucial, not only for tribal welfare, but also to counter extremism, that is Naxalism. So take up this practice question based on this topic, a small 10-mark question. Next, we have another article related to the FATF, something interesting which has happened between India and Pakistan. See, first, let's talk about FATF quickly, a few basic points about FATF, and then we'll understand this particular development. The FATF, or Financial Action Task Force, it's an intergovernmental body which was set up in 1989 by the G7 countries to counter money laundering. In 2001, after the 9/11 terror attacks that clearly exposed the links between money laundering and terrorist financing, FATF was given a second objective to counter terrorist financing. So since then, FATF has been acting like a policy making body, a body which sets global standards, creates a global regulatory framework to implement CML, counter money laundering measures, and ATF, anti terror financing measures. Now, these measures recommended by FATF has to be followed not just by the members, but by all the jurisdictions around the world. The FATF has around 39 members, including India. It even has a few regional groups like European Union, Gulf Cooperation Council. And apart from these members of FATF, even all the other jurisdictions, they are obligated to implement FATF standards to counter money laundering and implement anti-terror financing measures. FATF enforces them through 9 FATF-styled regional bodies that are distributed around the world. Every country, every jurisdiction is obligated to implement these standards, and they are reviewed, their performance is reviewed by these FATF-styled regional bodies. So FATF not only recommends the policies, recommends the measures, sets the standards, but it can review and even enforce penalties on those who are violating its standards. Through periodic reviews, if FATF finds any gaps in implementation of these measures, the FATF can even greylist that country. It's like issuing a notice. It can put them on a watch list, give them a target and a deadline to make corrections. And if they don't, if they deliberately violate these guidelines of the FATF, then the grey listed country can even be blacklisted. Now, getting grey listed or blacklisted by FATF can have serious economic consequences. It can cripple your trade, your exports and imports, right? It leads to global economic sanctions. Global organizations will not provide loans or funds to such countries. IMF, World Bank, and others will completely cut off their funding and loans. It will hurt capital flow, foreign capital investments, right? The credit rating will drop. The sovereign credit rating will drop to junk status. No foreign investor would invest in such a country, and the trade, import, export of the nation will cripple. So today we have few blacklisted countries. Can you find out which are the blacklisted countries by FATF and mention that in the comment section below? See, grey list is something Pakistan has served on 3 times as of now. Since the 26/11 Mumbai attacks, since 2009, India has ensured Pakistan gets grey listed for its failure to tackle terror financing and money laundering. It has been on the grey list 3 times, recently from 2018 to 2022, before it was removed from the grey list. Now, after the Pahalgam attack, India has been again making attempts to get Pakistan grey listed, if possible, even get Pakistan blacklisted. This is part of India's course of diplomacy. Now, recently, there was a development few years ago in 2020. Indian Customs, in coordination with intelligence agencies and Navy and Coast Guard, they seized a suspicious container ship in the Arabian Sea, which was headed towards Pakistan. On board this ship that was seized by Indian authorities, there was a suspicious package, a suspicious food which was being transported to Pakistan. Upon inspection, India realized that this was a prohibited dual use item which was being smuggled into Pakistan. A dual use item is something which can have a civilian application and a military application as well. It essentially contained a certain chemical component and certain components which are used in the manufacturing of missiles and missile rotors, which are used to make ballistic missiles. India's investigation further showed that this order was placed by the National Development Complex, which is based out of Islamabad. National Development Complex, or NDC, which is headquartered in Islamabad, is the one which is involved in the development of Pakistani missile systems, including its ballistic missile systems. So India clearly established that this illegal consignment, a dual-use item which was being smuggled on board a ship, was headed towards Islamabad, and it was linked with the National Development Complex, which would use this dual-use item possibly to build ballistic missiles. Now, any such smuggling of these dual-use items which are prohibited, this is a violation of export control regimes such as MTCR, the Missile Technology Control Regime. Under MTCR, any technology, any component, any raw material which can be used to make missiles and drones or UAVs that can travel more than 300 kilometers, which can carry more than 500 kilograms of payload, such technologies are prohibited from international trade. Only members of MTCR can trade in these technologies only after obtaining permission, only after following the permit system. Pakistan didn't follow any of that. It's neither a member of MTCR nor such licenses were procured. It was being illegally smuggled through commercial shipping routes. So India caught Pakistan red-handed, and now FATF has concluded the same in the report. FATF has backed India's investigation and evidence linking this consignment with Pakistan's missile program, and it has clearly labeled Pakistan as a violator of international rules. This works in India's favor. It could give more support for India's argument that Pakistan deserves to be grey listed and maybe even blacklisted for failing to implement these FATF standards. So now let's take a quick look at the prelims articles, just two small articles. On page 1, we have an article referring to International Yoga Day. Now, can you find out in which year did India push for the designation of International Yoga Day? Please let me know in the comments. Through the United Nations, India has got International Yoga Day designated. Now, you tell me in which year was it? Since which year are we celebrating International Yoga Day under the aegis of the United Nations? So, this is marked on the 21st of June every year. So on this occasion, Prime Minister Modi, who actively participates in these events, right? Because India promotes this around the world as part of our soft power cultural diplomacy. Yoga, which is clearly of Indian origin, the traditional alternate system of medicine focused on a healthy, balanced living, right? Yoga is not just a form of exercise or workout, it's a lifestyle, a healthier, balanced lifestyle where the body, the mind, soul exists in harmony with nature. So, on the occasion of International Yoga Day, PM Modi has highlighted the values of yoga and called upon the world to implement yoga for humanity. Please make a note of this. This can be a prelims question. Prime Minister Modi has called upon the world to use yoga for humanity. This is a very profound statement that the Prime Minister has made. It comes at a very crucial time when the world is completely ravaged by conflicts. Since yoga brings inner peace, it brings the mind and the soul in alignment, gives that spiritual enlightenment and aligns you with nature, connects you with your nature. It inherently has a advantage to build a harmonious bond with the people around you in the society, and this could be scaled at the global level as well. So Prime Minister Modi has highlighted these virtues of yoga, which can bring inner peace, which can bring stability, harmony. And PM Modi has urged global powers to rely upon the spirit of yoga to build peaceful relations, to end current conflicts. That's why the statement is very important. The call for yoga for humanity by the Prime Minister can be very significant. By the way, the theme for this year's International Yoga Day is also in the same line and length. The theme was Yoga for One Earth, One Health. This aligns with our concept, philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam as well. So India is pushing yoga as a soft power cultural tool. Now we are even trying to push yoga as a tool for diplomacy, a tool for peace. Essentially, we are trying to project this as a possible solution for a peaceful, stable world to move away from conflicts and wars. Next, another article on page number 9. The Ministry of Health has decided to integrate the National Rare-Blood Registry, the national database for rare blood groups. This database is going to be integrated with e-Rakt Kosh, which is a parallel database for blood banks and blood donations in the country. I'm sure all of you know how important blood donation can be, how life-saving it can be for several patients, right? Many of them belong to common blood types like A, B, AB positive, etc. So for them, sourcing blood is not much of a problem. But there are few rare blood groups, like let's say AB negative. There are few ultra rare blood groups as well, like the Bombay blood type or the P null blood type, the RH null type. There are many patients in our country suffering from hemophilia who lack the blood clotting factor, meaning their blood doesn't clot. So they are at greater risk of any surgery, any injury, right? If they need emergency transfusion of blood, they don't get enough donors. They don't get enough donors readily available because they're very rare and very hard to find. So that's why the government has set up a national rare donor registry, which already exists, right? It documents all the blood types in our country, the rare, ultra rare blood types, creates a registry, a database of our citizens, right, who have these blood types, who can become donors in case of emergencies. Parallelly, we have an online database system, a centralized system for blood transfusion and blood donation, the e-Rakt Kosh, a system which is set up under National Health Mission. Now, these two systems are being integrated. They're being brought together. The National Rare Blood Donor Registry is going to be integrated with the e-Rakt Kosh in order to facilitate the availability of even ultra rare blood types easily for patients across the country. So please focus on this article as well for your prelims. And with this, I bring my discussion to an end. I hope you guys have understood everything. I hope you have liked the session as well. So please let me know through your likes, your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That's it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.